Do we want to
Yep.
go ahead and get started? Okay. Good morning, everyone. I call this hearing to order. My name is Troy Hawk. I am legal counsel for the Nebraska Department of Education, and I will be the presiding officer conducting the hearings virtually today, June 3rd, 2024, using Zoom on A, the proposed revisions to Title 92, Nebraska Administrative Code, Chapter 4, Rule 4, regulations for textbook loans to children enrolled in private schools in Nebraska. B, proposed revisions to Title 92 Nebraska Administrative Code, Chapter 28, regulations and standards for investigations and non-public professional practices. And C, the proposed repeal of Title 92 Nebraska Administrative Code, Chapter 29, regulations and standards for professional practices, case determinations by the state board. The legal notice of hearing was published in the Omaha World Herald on April 30th, 2024. The hearings for each rule will be held separately in numerical order. To begin the hearing on each rule, a Nebraska Department of Education staff member will describe and explain the proposed rule or revision. This will be followed by testimony by interested persons. Each person presenting written or oral testimony is requested to A, state and spell your first and last name, and provide a general indication of where you live, for example, the city, county, or the school district. B, state a concise suggestion or recommendation of what action you would like the board to take. And C, state the rationale or reason for your recommendation. You may reinforce, but please refrain from repeating previous testimony. Each person testifying will be limited to 5 minutes. If additional time is needed, it may be provided at the discretion of the presiding officer. At the conclusion of all testimony from interested persons, the Nebraska Department of Education staff member who opened on the rule will have the opportunity to respond to the testimony presented today. And then that will conclude the testimony. The testimony presented will be recorded, and the video recording will be made available to the State Board of Education and the public on the department's website at the time the State Board considers action on these rules later this week. All written testimony must be submitted to the hearing official prior to 5 p.m. Central today in order to be made part of the record of this hearing. The email for submitting written comments is nde.rulehearing@nebraska.gov. Again, that's nde.rulehearing@nebraska.gov. This email address may also be found on the department's website at www.education.ne.gov by following the rules and regulations link on the right side of the page to the public notices of upcoming rule hearings. At this time, we will begin the hearing on Rule 4, Regulations for Textbook Loans to Children Enrolled in Private Schools in Nebraska, with Bryce Wilson from the Nebraska Department of Education describing and explaining the proposed revisions. Mr. Wilson, you may begin.
All right, Bryce Wilson, Finance Officer, NDE, that's BRYCE, WILSON. Rule 4, the rule hearing today is a result of LB 705 passed during the 2023 legislative session. The proposed rule changes include a complete revision to the textbook loan process that requires the NDE or a third-party vendor hired by NDE to administer the textbook loan program instead of a public school district. The revisions include language that requires the commissioner on September 1 of every calendar year to notify all approved or accredited non-public administrators about the program, and sets forth October 15th for any non-public school administrator to respond in order for the non-public school to participate in the program for the following school year. The revisions include the data with the formula the commissioner will use that has the cost per child allocation of funds appropriated by the legislature. The commissioner then notifies the participating non-public schools of their allocation. Finally, the revisions set forth the procedures for participating non-public schools to request textbooks and manage the textbooks provided. The revisions include language that allows the commissioner to contract with a third-party vendor to carry out the duties of the commissioner under the rule. Additionally, the definition of textbook in the revisions is linked directly to the definition in section 79-734, part 3.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Is there anyone wishing to testify on the proposed revisions to Rule 4? If so, you can use the raise your hand function in the chat, or you can just raise your hand. Mr. Tom Vinzer, please go ahead.
All right, thank you, Troy. My name is Tom Venzer, Tomvenzor. I'm the Executive Director for the Nebraska Catholic Conference, and we're based here out of Lincoln, Nebraska. I just want to say, first of all, thank you to the NDE for all the work on Rule 4 and the update to this rule and reg based on all of the statutory changes that the legislature adopted. We've been very grateful and very thankful for all the cooperative work on this update, and very much in favor of the rule and reg moving forward, with one small reservation. So like I said, generally favorable to everything that's been changed. We just have one small concern, which would be in 005.05, and that's the insertion of the word non-sectarian next to the term textbook. So we, two reasons, for our concern here. One is that the term non-sectarian is nowhere to be found in the underlying statute, so we don't believe that there's statutory authority for the use of that term in the rule and reg. And then second of all, based on a 2022 decision by the U.S. Supreme Court in Carson versus Macon, we believe that the use of the word non-sectarian actually has First Amendment constitutional concerns. And in that case, in Carson versus Macon, the court basically said that the use of non-sectarian language violated the First Amendment because it was held to be a generally available benefit to the public, and so we believe that this is an analogous situation. So that's a concern we have, just with that one term there, and we would ask that be removed, before the proposed rule and reg go forward through the process. But otherwise, again, very grateful, very thankful for all these revisions. We're very much looking forward to how this will all work out here into the future, as this is a major change for Rule 4. So we're excited for that, and our families are very excited for that as well. So thank you for your time and consideration today of my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Vinzer. Is there anyone else that would like to make any comments on Rule 4 at this time? Seeing no more comments, Mr. Wilson, is there anything you'd like to add at this time? Mr. Wilson waives his comments. And that will close the hearing on proposed revisions to Rule 4. Mr. Vinzer, thank you for your testimony. Mr. Wilson, thank you for your time. We will now begin the hearing on Rule 28, Regulations and Standards for Investigations and Non-Public Professional Practices, with Tamara Waltz from the Nebraska Department of Education, describing and explaining the proposed revisions. Ms. Waltz, you may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Hawk, and good morning. My name is Tamara Waltz, T-A-M-R-A-W-A-L-Z as in zebra, and I'm an attorney in the legal division of the Nebraska Department of Education. After the passage of LB 1306, which in essence dissolved the Nebraska Professional Practices Commission and becomes effective June 19th, 2024 in terms of new law, many necessary revisions were made to Rule 28 to comply with the new law. Some of those changes incorporated portions of Rule 29. The new process to hear and decide ethics complaints as mandated by LB 1306 is encompassed in the revisions to Rule 28. New Rule 28 relies heavily on the hearing provisions contained in Rule 61, which is modeled after the standard procedure governing contested cases filed with the Nebraska Department of Education, pursuant to the adjudication portion of the Administrative Procedure Act. Modifications to Rule 28 include, among others, processes and procedures designed to streamline the hearing process for petitions the commissioner files regarding ethics complaints, making them more efficient and effective. First, a number of definitions in Rule 28 were amended to mirror the provisions of LB 1306, without citing to extraneous items such as those already included and applicable via statute. Second, the basic process for hearing ethics complaints against educators and administrators is retained in the revisions to Rule 28. But instead of the PPC hearing the cases and recommending final action to the State Board of Education, such hearings will be conducted by hearing officers on an as-needed basis as provided in a new section of Rule 28. Third, hearing officers will be required to submit findings of fact, conclusions of law, and a recommended order to the the State Board of Education after the hearing officers hold an administrative hearing at which evidence will be received and witnesses will testify. Fourth, another substantive change is that instead of the use of 21 days for many deadlines in the current Rule 28, those time limits are changed to 20 days per Rule 61. Finally, a new provision in Rule 28 addresses the mechanics of the State Board of Education's review and final decision on the recommended order submitted by the hearing officer. These revisions are in conformance with LB 1306, which will become law on July 19th, 2024. And for those reasons, we support the proposed revisions to Rule 28. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Walls. Is there anyone wishing to testify on the proposed revisions to Rule 28? If so, you may just raise your hand. Mr. Welding.
Thank you, Troy. My name is Nick Welding, N-I-C-K-W-E-L-D-I-N-G, and I'm an attorney at Norby & Welding Hunsaker here in Lincoln, Nebraska. My office serves as legal counsel to the Nebraska State Education Association, or NSCA, and I'm here to speak briefly on behalf of the NSCA in support of the changes to Rule 28. I want to first thank Tamara Waltz and Brian Halstead for giving my office an opportunity to provide input on the revisions to Rule 28 and Rule 29. My office represents a good portion of the educators who will be going through the proceedings being addressed here today. So we really appreciate the opportunity to have some input. The NSCA supported LB 1306, which eliminated the Nebraska Professional Practices Commission and established the process necessitating the changes to Rule 28 and 29. The department's rules, in my view, are really the meat and the bones when it comes to the legal processes that I'm involved in. And as a practitioner for over a decade in these types of proceedings, I look to the rules virtually in every single case that I handle. The revised rules before you this morning maintain a lot of the practices that have been established over the decades and that have really worked effectively. The revised rules bring these effective practices, in my view, into the context of the new proceedings which will begin here in July, the hearings before the hearing officer. And I find that the revised rules provide educators with a fair opportunity to exercise their due process rights and have a meaningful say in contested cases involving their teaching certificates. So really for those reasons, I would ask that the regulations as presented to the board be adopted. That's really all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Welding.
Thank you.
I see no other audience members that may wish to testify. So Ms. Walsh, is there any clarification or anything you'd like to add at this time?
No, thank you.
Okay, this closes the hearing on the proposed revisions to Rule 28. Thank you for your testimony. And we will now begin the hearing on the repeal of Rule 29, Regulations and Standards for Professional Practices Case Determinations by the State Board. Again, with Tamara Waltz from the Department of Education explaining the proposed repeal. Ms. Waltz, you may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Hawk, and good morning. My name is Tamara Waltz, T-A-M-R-A-W-A-L-Z as in zebra, and I am an attorney with the Legal Division of the Nebraska Department of Education. After the passage of LB 1306, which in essence dissolved the Nebraska Professional Practices Commission effective July 19th of this year, many necessary revisions were made to Rule 28. Some of those changes incorporated portions of Rule 29. Other parts of Rule 29 were no longer needed. The new process to hear and decide ethics complaints encompassed by the revisions to Rule 28 obviated the need for Rule 29. New Rule 28 relies heavily on the hearing provisions contained in Rule 61, which is modeled after the standard procedure governing contested cases filed with the Nebraska Department of Education under the adjudication portions of the Administrative Procedure Act. Because of LB 1306 and the modifications to Rule 28 that are proposed at this time, Rule 29 is no longer necessary and at this point would be duplicative of a number of sections of Rule 28 and not in conformance with LB 1306. For those reasons, Rule 29 should be repealed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Walls. Is there anyone wishing to testify on the proposed repeal of Rule 29? Mr. Welding?
Thank you. My name is Nick Welding, Nickwelding, and I'm attorney at Norby Welding and Hunsker here in Lincoln, Nebraska. My office represents the Nebraska State Education Association. And again, I'll speak briefly, very briefly on behalf of the NSCA. And really, I won't really repeat a lot of the my prior testimony on the revisions to Rule 28 because a lot of the same reasons apply for the revisions to Rule 29, but I will just express my agreement with Ms. Walls' characterization of the reasons necessitating the total repeal of Rule 29. I view them as repetitive and duplicative of what is already going to be covered in Rule 28. So I would agree and support with the repeal of Rule 29.
Thank you, Mr. Welding. Is there anyone else that would like to testify on the proposed repeal of Rule 29? Okay, seeing no one else who wants to testify, Ms. Walls, is there anything you'd like to add at this time? Ms. Walls is waiving any further comment. So this closes the hearing on the proposed repeal of Rule 29 and closes the hearings for today. As a reminder, if anybody wishes to still submit written testimony, that must be submitted to the hearing official prior to 5 p.m. Central Time today, and that may be submitted to nde.rulehearing@nebraska.gov. Again, this closes the hearing on the proposed repeal of Rule 29 and closes the hearings for today. Enjoy the rest of your day.